Welcome to video 3, the chassis. So in video 2, we completed the board. In video 1, we learned more about the transformer and identifying the right wires. If you have not watched those videos, please watch them. Otherwise, this is not the way to go. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do with the chassis is install 4 jacks. Alright, so let's talk about the jacks for a minute. There are 3 pieces to the jack that you must know. There's the tip, the switch, and the ground sleeve. And we need to identify which are each of these. So the tip, which is this, is actually connected to the one on the left for these specific jacks. If you're not building this kit, your jacks may be different. One way to check is to look at the wafers here, okay? And you can see that this pin here, I'll call it, is connected to the middle wafer, and the middle wafer is not connected to the tip. Okay, this wafer, the bottom wafer, you can trace the metal back to the tip. So that's how you figure out which one's the tip, switch, and ground. So in this case, we've got the tip here, the switch here, and the ground here. Remember that when we are wiring these things in, we want to orient them in such a way that our wiring will be easy for us in the chassis. One other thing, you're going to have one jack in there with only 2 points, and that is the ground sleeve and the tip. Okay, this is going to be the external speaker jack, so do not wire it where these jacks go. Make sure to set this one with 2 pins aside. You're also going to set aside one of the jacks here for the speaker jack, leaving us with the 4 jacks remaining. Each jack is going to have a washer and a nut. Basically what we're going to do here is feed it in here, put the nut on here, and turn it. Okay, that's how I do it anyway. You could also put the nut on the back. The washer on the back. But let me show you how to orient these first. Try number 3. Alright, so we want to orient this in such a way, it's very important because it'll make our wiring a lot easier. This is the tip, this is the switch, and this is the ground. And the reason I can see that it's a ground is it's connected right to the sleeve, and anytime it's connected right to the sleeve, it's a ground. We can clearly see that the metal here connects to the tip, so that's the tip, and then that only leaves the switch left. So what we're going to do is orient it in such a way where the pin tip is facing downward. Okay? Downward to the right. That's how we're going to orient these. Alright, you can see we've installed the jacks with the tip pin facing to the right diagonally downward. Now, one thing about tightening these is I have hand tightened them because I've found that in some instances you may have to remove them later, so I would hand tighten them well enough to wire them and then make sure to tighten everything later, because if you get into a tricky spot and you have to remove one, it's a pain if it's really tight. And what I'm actually doing is, I've hand tightened them, but then I'm going to give them one good turn, just to keep them steady and make sure it doesn't change the orientation. So these won't be tight, but they won't loosen as I'm soldering. Alright, you know what time it is now. It's time for our preamp tube sockets, which is exciting. Alright, these guys right here. Orienting these properly is very important. I'll show you. Now you'll see there's a gap between pins 1 and 9. 1 and 9, 1 and 9, 1, 9. Okay, and we've got to put this in here like this. That is the way it's going to be oriented, with the gap facing the right hole. we have this hardware to help us mount it. Alright, there's one in. You can see how I've oriented it here. I did the screw head on the inside the chassis because it's easy to get an Allen key in there, and also it'll prevent the wires from coming in contact from these screws, which would be sticking upward otherwise. Alright, we got them in and oriented properly. The next thing you're going to want to do is spread the pins out a little bit. You can do it with your fingers or a tool. I would do it with a tool. Small pair of needle nose pliers or something like that. Alright, the pins are somewhat bent back now, which will make wiring a little bit easier. This next part is very important. We are going to begin wiring the filament wires, and they need to be braided. I'll show you a trick for braiding. So this is one big piece of wire, which you'll likely have two, just one. And instead of guessing my lengths here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the two ends of that one wire, and I'm just going to start twisting them as tightly as possible. Alright, this is going to go between pins. I'm even going to try to get it tighter. Pins 4 and 9 and pins 4 and 9. And that looks like it's going to be long enough for our first. So I'm going to cut it right here. Now this is going to help stop noise. So what we're going to do now is strip the ends of these and then solder them in. Alright, let's talk a little bit about the pins. This is pin 9 and this is pin 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. What we want to do is connect our new wires to pin 4 and 9. Alright, I've got it through the hole now. What I'm going to do is actually take some needle nose pliers, and with as steady hand as I can get, I'm going to curve the wires upward, kind of like that. Alright, getting a little bit ahead of myself here, but what I like to do, so I know how long this braided wire needs to be between the preamp jack, preamp socket and power amp tube socket. I just want to install this temporarily. So first, this has to be oriented properly too. Okay, so let's take a look. This is really important. This is the bottom of the chassis right here. It's solid. The little notch has to point upward to the open part of the chassis. And they've given you these plastic spacers. Alright, so that's how you orient it. Alright, so we got this tube socket installed. Let's talk about the pins. The one to the left from our angle of this little notch is pin 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We're going to take our braided wire and we're going to see exactly how long it needs to be to go from pins 4 and 9 over here over to this power amp socket. Okay, this wire is going to go to pins 2 and 7. Don't solder anything yet, we're just estimating the length of the wire. Alright, I've cut the wire after it's been braided here, and these leads will go to pins 4 and 9 over here, and will be 2 and 7, 2 and 7 over here. So we know we've got the right length of wire, but I'm not going to put the other two sockets in yet. Alright, we've now got our short section of braided wire and our long section of braided wire. I'm not the best braider, but this is much better than my first build where I didn't braid at all, resulting in noise. Alright, so now we've got to do something to the preamp sockets before we solder those wires in. Basically, we're going to put a jumper between pins 4 and 5 Okay, I've got a tiny jumper wire. You can either clip some of the wire and rip the cloth off of it, or you can use one of your old leads from one of the resistors that you cut when we built the board. So this is now going to go in pins 4 and 5. So I decided to solder my jumper in on pin 5 only, so that it will stay in place when we put the braided wire in. Jumper in. Alright, remember we've also got to get a jumper between pins 3 and 8. We're going to go ahead and just, pull it out. There's our jumper. Okay, I'm going to solder that in only on pin 3 because I'm going to have to put a wire to pin 8 when we put the board in. Alright, we have the jumper wire here, and then the jumper wire in between these. Now the only pins I've soldered are pins 3 here, pins 5 here, and pins 5 here, because we're going to have to put a wire in these other pins, and we don't want the holes to be closed off yet with solder. Alright, I've gone ahead and soldered into pin 4 and 9 with our braided wire. Next, I'm going to carry it over here, and I'm going to place the wire into 4 and 9, but I'm not going to solder it yet. Alright, so I've gone ahead and soldered pin 4 and 9 here. So just to review the work that we've done, okay, there's a jumper between 4 and 5, a tiny wire you can see right above my fingernail, okay. Then we've got a jumper between pins 3 and 8, 1, 2, 3, 8 over here, and that is in there. We haven't soldered pin 8 yet because another wire from the board is going there. We've got a jumper over here from pins 4 and 5. This time we don't have a jumper from 3 and 8, so no worries there. And we've also got our braided wire into 4 and 9. So that is leading over here to nothing yet, but it will be soldered to this socket. Just to give you an idea of what it looks like, we're going to want to keep this wire really close to the upper lip here if we can, to minimize noise, because the filament wires introduce a lot of noise, but this braiding should help. Next thing we're going to do is get these rubber grommets in. Now these things are a pain, so what I normally do is just kind of play with it like Play-Doh until it warms up a little bit and becomes more elastic, and then I just brute force it. It has to fit in that hole, so you just kind of push it in there and then do the rest with pliers. As you can see, not the prettiest job in the world, but they're in there. Okay, next thing we're going to do is install the input, or the speaker jacks. The one with the 3 pins goes here, and the one with 2 pins goes here. Okay, I'm going to put a wire from the tip to the tip pin. Okay, approaching from a new angle now. You can see I've soldered this end of the wire, but I haven't soldered this one because there's actually going to be a wire that comes from the output transformer to this. So we're going to keep that unsoldered for now. Alright, next thing we're going to do is put a jumper wire right here between switch and ground. Alright, we're going to install the potentiometers. So the first thing you're going to want to do is there's a little stub here, and just pry it off like that. I'm going to go ahead and put that there. And I'm going to go ahead and actually tighten this guy, because I know I won't be taking him out, hopefully. going to solder this guy in to this pin here. Next thing we're going to do is modify the potentiometer so that this pin here is grounded. To do this, you just kind of pull. It's going to feel tough, but it's the way to go. Okay? I'm going to go ahead and just get it nice and scuffed up. You can also use a Dremel or a sander. Yeah, that seems, look at that, that's so much better. Okay, I scuffed the other one up as well. Let's see if it adheres better. Just want to fill that gap. Oh yeah. That's excellent. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and put the pots in now. Alright, we've got a Dremel tool here. And I'm going to just scuff up the backs of these pots. Now there's one more place we have to put we've got to use a Dremel in this corner. There's going to be a lead, a ground lead that attaches right here. So let's go ahead and do that. Alright. That is how you get something to ground nicely. Next we're going to solder in this bright cap here. Now that's going to go between this terminal and the middle terminal here. Make sure the bright cap does not touch, the arm here does not touch the ground. Next we're going to take a red lead here, tuck it under here. It's going to go from the middle port to the end port on the volume. If your leads are long like that, you want to clip them just because you don't want them to hit the pot or the signal will go to ground. I'm going to put the lead here and I'm only going to solder this right here because there's another wire required for this that jumps to this. So we'll get there soon. But next we're going to put a lead from the far right terminal to the far right terminal of the volume pots. I'm going to just solder this one for now, because there's going to be a connection to the board to this one. Alright, that's good for now. We're going to keep the tone pot unsoldered to this pot, but it will eventually be soldered to this pot. Alright, we're now going to do some wiring on the jacks. I'm going to now put a 1 meg resistor in between the ground sleeve, which is at the top, and the tip. Alright, fun fact that I missed here is you've got to have a jumper between ground and switch, which is in the middle. Okay, so the next step is we have a jumper wire here between the switch and ground, and a resistor between, a 1 meg resistor between ground and tip. I have not soldered the tip yet, as another wire has to go in there. Okay, once again, a 1 meg resistor between ground and tip, and a jumper between ground and switch. Now we're just going to solder these two right here. I'm going to put a red lead from the switch to the tip of the top jack. I literally could not solder that jumper in, so I've got my helping hand helping me out here. This is the lower jack. I've taken it out. And this is the jumper that's going to go from the switch to the tip. Alright, got my other jumper from tip to switch, tip to switch. Earlier we installed the output transfer grommets. We're just going to go ahead and do the output transformer here. Unless you get lucky, there's no apparent mounting bolts for the output transformer, so you'll have to find a couple of bolts and washers that will do the job. Alright, the blue, red, and black wire are over here. Green, yellow wire are over here. turn it over. Alright, getting the lock washers on. Use a lock washer or a washer if you can. Alright, so one thing I do is I put a protective layer of tape down just in case one of the points on the board that's conductive hits the chassis and electrifies the chassis. This keeps it from doing so, but so will the standoffs. Now I will use nuts as standoffs. Alright, so after we put the tape down, you'll see the 3 holes. We need to get through, we need to make those holes again so we can line the board up. So what I'm going to do is use a small drill bit and poke the holes through those tape. Alright, there are our holes. Now we can line up the board. And that's the next step, finally putting the board in. There's one change we're going to need to make here, and that is going to be to orient the jacks sideways like this. In order for the board to fit and not touch the tip of the jacks, this is what we need to do. It is now time to put the board in. I suggest bending your wires upward at a 90-degree angle. These are the only 2 holes that really line up. So in order to get creative here, I'm going to use these nuts as standoffs to keep the board somewhat elevated. Even though we have this protective layer of tape, it can't hurt to be extra safe. Okay, we're gonna try to put the board in. We've got our makeshift standoffs here. The only purpose of these are acting as spacers. So you can see here, I'm just gently putting it in. Hardly any effort required. And I'm going to line it up with our 2 standoffs here. Okay, right now, I'm just using my Allen driver, my Allen key, and twisting this to tighten it. Gonna go ahead and put our screw through our standoff here. Alright, the board is in place with our bolts. So now it's all secure, non-conductive, and we're ready to go. So what I'm going to do now is put in the remaining power supply sockets for the power amp tubes. Alright, look at all the fingerprints on this thing. It's nuts. I forgot to attach the tube clip earlier. I call this thing a tube clip. It creates friction so that the tube doesn't fall out. So, okay, what we're doing now is installing the socket. You've got these little guys. This plastic thing slides underneath like this, and then the screw comes in from the bottom. That's the size you need, 5.5 mil. Oh yeah, those are locked down now. Alright, now another one. Alright, we got the final tube socket in and the tube clips in, the jacks, preamp sockets, the board is in, the wiring is done, the pots are in, the jacks are in. Now the jacks still need some soldering. Remember, once we start soldering the board, the tips of these 2 right here, these will need some soldering right here. So we're actually going to bring some wires from the board, put it in that, and then solder it. And we're also going to wait to do our fuse, jewel light, and switches last. Thanks for watching part 3. Hope it was helpful.